If you found a hidden room in your favorite place, would you explore it even if it meant facing your greatest fear? A brittle silence hung heavily through the dim, cramped aisles of the bookstore. Outside, the winter dusk bled a cold, leaden blue into the street lamplit town, but inside, the fading golden glow of dusty lamps cast wavering pools of warmth that barely touched the cavernous shadows between shelves. Lila's hands trembled as she balanced the teetering stack of books, their worn spines straining against gravity and time. The gentle hum of the heater sputtered unevenly, a shiver of static air swirling just beneath the patterned ceiling tessellations. Her breath was shallow, misting faintly as the chill seeped through her thin sweater. Every footstep echoed hollow and uncertain on the scuffed wooden floor, the soft thud of thick-soled shoes muffled beneath scattered scraps of fallen paper. Shelves loomed like silent sentinels, guardians of long-forgotten knowledge and fragile secrets taunting her fragile confidence. Lila's gaze flicked down to the bundle of heavy volumes stacked precariously in her arms. A single, rogue book nudged loose, sliding and tumbling like a clumsy messenger into the path of an approaching customer navigating the narrow aisle. The harsh crash of pages spilling was a sudden eruption, loud and unforgiving in the stifling quiet. Time fractured. The ambient murmur dissolved into sharp glances. Conversation ceased at neighboring tables as heads turned, eyes widening in surprise and veiled judgment. The soft thud of the fallen books was punctuated by the sharp click of heels drawing to a halt. "Watch it," a voice snapped, brittle and biting. A harsh laugh followed a clipped, derisive sound that scraped against Lila's skin like sharp-edged glass. Fingers tightened instinctively on the edges of the fallen volumes, trembling. She lowered her gaze, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on her chest, a cage building around her fragile hope. "Sorry. I didn't mean." Her voice broke, swallowed by the sudden emptiness of the space. The woman who had spoken smirked, her eyes glittering with mockery under the flickering ceiling light. "Maybe if you paid attention, you wouldn't be so clumsy." Lila's cheeks burned, a flush of shame spreading like wildfire beneath the patchy lamplight. Her hands trembled as she knelt, gathering the scattered pages, her fingers brushing over worn text and faded inkwords that suddenly felt heavier than before, burdened with silent accusation. From a few feet away, a cluster of customers exchanged looks, quiet whispers folding into the still air. The low buzz of judgment was like a dull roar in her ears, pressing relentlessly. A candle flickered on a nearby shelf, its pale flame dancing erratically, casting long, grotesque shadows that writhed like spectral fingers across worn titles and cracked bindings. The scent of melted wax mingled with the musty musk of old paper, an intoxicating blend of comfort and decay. Lila swallowed hard, breath-catching as the heat from embarrassment collided with the growing tide of isolation. The bookstore no longer felt a refuge but a labyrinth of silent scrutiny and creeping doubt. Along the aisles, a whispered murmur floated her name, soft and elusive, as though spoken by the cracking pages themselves or the shadows whispering between the shelves. Her eyes lifted, catching a fleeting glimpse in the corner of a broken mirror, a pale, uncertain reflection staring back. The candle's flame fluttered again, and in that flicker, her face seemed to waver, half illuminated, half swallowed by darkness. The moment held, suspended between flicker and silence, light and shadow, a delicate, trembling balance that echoed the fragile thread upon which her fragile sanity seemed to hang. And then the candle guttered, plunging the aisle into deeper dusk, the silence thickening to a suffocating weight. Lila's fingers curled around the last book she held, her breath shallow, her heart a fragile, flickering pulse in the cold, fading light. The flicker of the candle on the weathered shelf cast faint, quivering shadows across Lila's bowed shoulders as she retreated into the farthest corner of the bookstore, a cramped alcove tucked between shelves bursting with forgotten tomes. The low hum of voices and footsteps seemed distant here, muffled as if filtered through layers of cold winter air pressing against grimy windows. It felt like a room suspended in time, steeped in the scent of decaying paper and fading dreams. Lila sank to the narrow ledge beneath the frosted pane, her breath forming small, ghostly clouds that dissolved into the stale air. She pressed her palms against her knees, each pulse in her wrists echoing the growing weight in her chest. The fall of those books, the sudden, sharp clatter, the bitter laughter, the sharpness of their eyes merged into one slow, sinking feeling, the familiar sting of insignificance. Her gaze drifted toward the cracked, yellowed pages of a nearby book, its spine split wide like a wound left raw and exposed. The muted light caught the threadbare fabric on her sleeve, casting her as fragile as the brittle volume she cradled. She swallowed, the dry ache of silence stretching taut between her thoughts. The quiet wasn't peace, it was an echo chamber of doubts and suppressed fears whispering louder than words ever could. Why can't I be enough? The silence seemed to ask. Why do I falter where others step with ease? The faint creak of wooden floorboards resounded elsewhere in the store, someone passing by, indifferent to her solitude, adding layers of isolation to the gathering shadows. The air grew colder under the broken glass bulbs overhead, their sputtering light throwing twisted shapes across walls that felt too close, too confining. Each flicker of the candle was a breath held precariously, a heartbeat struggling not to be swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Lila looked down again, fingers tracing the delicate edge of a book's torn page as if seeking a thread to pull herself from the depths. Memories surfaced unbidden. The warmth she'd once sought in the smiles of others, now dissipated. The quiet hope of acceptance crumbled beneath the weight of perceived failure. A sharp pang of loneliness licked at the space behind her ribs, an emptiness that had shadowed every hesitant step. Yet beneath the ache, a fragile ember glimmered, a faint and trembling pulse of resolve that refused to be extinguished. It flickered weakly but insistently, riding the thin line between despair and something new, something unknown. Her eyes, redrimmed yet resolute, lifted toward the library shelves where scattered rays of moonlight pierced the gloom. Between the gaps of stacked volumes lay a narrow space, dark and impenetrable, hinting at secrets long buried beneath layers of dust and time. Lila's breath caught. A whisper, soft and almost lost, wafted through the stillness. Not from lips, but from the very walls themselves. A rustle of paper, a sigh of silence, the faintest trace of a name riding the winter wind. Her fingers trembled but reached instinctively toward the shadowed gap, a small, desperate step toward unraveling the silence that had shrouded her world. The spark inside her pulsed brighter, fragile yet unrelenting. Around her, the flickering candle danced, its shadows stretching long and wavering on the time-worn wood, a delicate ballet of light and darkness, hope and fear interwoven. In the cold and the quiet, Lila sat poised on the edge, torn between retreat and the cusp of revelation, where the hidden truths began to stir in the depths of the ordinary. The brittle silence that had cloaked Lila's retreat was punctured quietly by the soft thud of an old, leather-bound book slipping from a higher shelf. It landed with gentle inevitability at her feet, rattling the dust motes that swirled in pale spirals within the muttering glow of a flickering candle. She crouched, fingertips trembling as they brushed the cracked spine, feeling the faint pulse of time and tremor in the fragile pages. As she eased the cover open, a crumpled letter tumbled out, edges browned and creased, like a whisper folded back into itself, hidden beneath layers of forgotten years. The candle flame danced, casting long shadows that wavered like ghosts across the text, illuminating a script handwritten in brittle, deliberate strokes. Lila's breath hitched, heart narrowing. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet it breathed a strange, haunting familiarity, pulling her deeper into the murky depths that the bookstore guarded with its dusty silence. The letter spoke of absence and secrets, of rooms concealed just beyond perception and truths tangled in the weave of old wood and fading paper. Her fingers trembled as they traced the sharp, determined words. If you find this, know there is more beneath the surface than these walls reveal. The forgotten room waits, and with it, the answers that must not be forgotten. The words reverberated within her like the echo of distant footsteps in an empty corridor. The flickering candlelight caressed the worn paper, its shadows stretching and twisting, as if the room itself breathed along with her, alive, watchful, waiting. A sudden cold draft slithered down the narrow aisles, rattling the pages of nearby tomes and making the candle falter, its flame stretching thin and blue. She glanced up, eyes wide, the shop seemingly holding its breath with her. The past pressed upon her a heavy weight in the muted space where whispers seemed caught between the bindings of the books. The letter's mystery stirred within her a fragile embers of purpose, knitting threads of longing and fear into a singular resolve. Lila rose slowly, cradling the letter as if it were both a talisman and a challenge. The shadows along the walls twisted again, the warmth of the candle warring with the encroaching chill that crept beneath her skin. The bookstore no longer felt like a mere workplace but a living entity, its heart beating in time with her own racing pulse. Her reflection caught briefly in a cracked mirror half illuminated by candlelight, half swallowed by darkness. For the first time, she saw not just a flickering candle on the verge of extinguishment but a flame struggling to burn steadily against the suffocating shroud. The ache in her chest softened, replaced by a tentative, iron will. The forgotten room that whispered promise beckoned. Hidden truths waited just out of sight, and with them, a possibility that went beyond fear. A sudden flicker of light from the candle revealed a smudge on the floor, a faint outline, almost imperceptible, an invitation or a warning. Lila's eyes locked onto it, the pull undeniable. Her breath hitched. She was no longer merely surviving the silence. She was beginning to listen, to chase the shadows. And beneath the ancient books and flickering flames, the bookstore held its secrets tight, as if waiting for her to make the first move. The candle's flame steadied, burning slow and resolute. Lila stepped forward, drawing the letter close. The path was only just beginning. The air in the bookstore was thick with dust and quiet unease, the faint smell of aged paper mingling with the cold breath of the winter evening seeping through ill-fitting windows. Lila moved carefully among the towering shelves, her footsteps soft but deliberate on the worn wooden floor, a rhythmic tapping that echoed in the vast, shadowed silence. The dim light above flickered erratically, casting oscillating patterns that twisted and bent against the stacks like ghostly figures, a spectral dance that cast a pall over the familiar yet uncanny sanctuary. Her hands trembled slightly as she retrieved the old book from the folding little nook she'd found, the letter still clutched like a secret talisman within its fragile pages. The script was faded but evocative, riddled with strange symbols and cryptic phrases that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their meaning tantalizingly out of reach yet irresistibly compelling. She ran her fingers over the strange markings, etched glyphs and curved sigils that whispered of forgotten rites and hidden doors. A soft shiver crept down her spine, merging fear and fascination into a knot of restless energy. Pieces of paper, pencil marks, and hastily scribbled notes now littered the little desk near the window where she had claimed a small corner as her own. She had begun to catalog every odd sign, every misplaced book and whispered secret tucked between the pages. The store was no longer just a place of work, it was a labyrinth, a puzzle box brimming with concealed meanings and silent warnings. Minutes slipped into hours as Lila lost herself in the fragile world of hidden messages and shadowed landscapes within text and wood. Her breath caught frequently a mix of anticipation and dread as she uncovered pages folded and unfolded, fingerprints smudged into margin clues, letters faded almost beyond recognition. "What are you doing back here?" The voice cut sharp, cold and unexpected from the corner, breaking her concentration and plunging the suffocating air into dense tension. Lila startled, clutching a book like a shield. A coworker loomed there, his eyes darkened with suspicion and something closer to scorn. "Just reading." Her voice was thin, wavering with something fierce yet fragile. He stepped closer, the shadows swallowing his features. "You're wasting time chasing ghosts. The store's been here for decades, and nothing ever changes. Maybe you should focus on what's real." His words stung not just for their dismissal but for the isolation they implied, the unspoken judgment that she was unworthy of the mysteries that tantalized her. Lila's gaze faltered, but that flicker of defiance burned quietly beneath. She gathered her scattered notes hastily, retreating deeper into the maze of aisles. The weight of eyes and silence was visceral, clinging like a second skin, but the letter's faded words flared with undiminished promise in her pocket, a whispered rebellion against the bleakness. Later, with the sunset bleeding fiery streaks across the frosted windowpanes, Lila's fingers traced the outline of the strange glyphs she'd sketched, the etched marks of broken language that had begun to feel like a secret map guiding her through the dark. The bookstore's hollow sigh seemed to watch her, a living breath in the cold gloom that pressed against her skin, pushing her forward and pulling her deeper into its mysteries. The line between reality and the unseen wavered, and Lila's heartbeat echoed in the fragile gap. She paused when a sudden chill swept through the stacks, and the flickering light of the candles overhead dimmed, then blazed briefly, throwing long, twisting shadows that seemed to reach toward her with eager fingers. Lila's breath caught, eyes darting toward the dark corners, silent watchers in the fading light. Her fingers clenched the letter tighter, drawing courage from the fragile script, a fragile flame amid the encroaching darkness. A whispered breath of air stirred the pages, a soft rustling like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The investigation had begun. The low murmur of voices and quiet rustles of paper in the bookstore had always been a comforting soundtrack to Lila's daily existence, but tonight it felt suffocating. Each whispered word, each glance, was a pinprick against the fragile cocoon she was trying to weave around herself. The betrayal thrummed in her veins, cold and sharp. She had confided her discoveries to Ellie, a colleague whose easy smiles once seemed to promise camaraderie, maybe even understanding. But Ellie's expression had darkened like shifting clouds as Lila shared her finds, the cryptic notations, the elusive symbols, her growing conviction that there was more beneath the dusty veneer of the store. "You're seeing things," Ellie had whispered one evening, voice cool and dismissive, eyes glinting with an unforgiving judgment that stung far worse than outright mockery. "There's no hidden room, no secret puzzles. Just stories and shadows you're chasing, Lila. You need to stop before you make a fool of yourself." Word spread like wildfire. What was whispered first by Ellie became a quicksilver rumor among the small circle of staff and regular patrons. Lila felt the weight of their starus-curious, skeptical, pitying pressing down on her, a physical force that made each step heavier than the last. The flickering candlelight in the cramped stockroom seemed to mock Harriet's flame dancing wildly, unable to hold steady against the creeping drafts, as unsteady as her faltering resolve. In the solitude of the back office, walls lined with yellowed ledgers and forgotten invoices, Lila's hands trembled as she sifted once more through the collection of papers she'd gathered. Each scrap of parchment, each margin note, was an echo of the pasta secret waiting to shatter the dam of silence. Her breath hitched as the distant laughter filtered through the thin wooden door, carrying with it a sting of isolation and sharp reminder that she was now the outsider, the center of whispers she could neither join nor cease. Yet beneath the swell of loneliness, something stubborn and fierce clung to life inside her. The letter, now folded neatly in her pocket, burned like a secret oath against her ribs. It whispered of unseen doors and hidden truths, of mysteries waiting not just to be discovered but to be understood. Late one night, as the bookstore's lights dimmed and flickered in the encroaching darkness, Lila ventured toward the rear shelves, there ancient wood brooding under layers of dust and time. Her fingers traced the spines, the symbols sketched hastily on a forgotten page illuminating like faint, beckoning stars in the gloom. Suddenly, the overhead lights stuttered and went out, plunging the shop into a suffocating blackness. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the quiet, chilling whisper of her own breath and the low, tremulous crackling of the candle's flame struggling in the dark. Heart-pounding, Lila's gaze strained to pierce the impenetrable shadow as a soft conspiring voice seemed to brush past her ear just beyond understanding. She caught a glimpse of scrawled words on a faded note, pinned hastily behind a loose board. "Seek what lies beneath, but beware the watcher." Her pulse quickened. The dread twisted and coiled, but beneath it roared a fierce surge of determination. The unseen force that had loomed, shaping the edges of her fear, no longer seemed an abstract specter but a looming presence she must confront. The whispered warnings, the flickering lights, they were not just threats but a summons. With trembling hands clutching her find, Lila stepped deeper into the shadows, ready to face the truths folded in darkness, knowing that the path ahead could fracture everything she believed or, perhaps, finally reveal who she was meant to become. The store waited, silent but alive, its mysteries breathing through the cold air, as the candle's flame steadied against the night. The bookstore felt colder than ever. The creeping shadows lengthened. The flickering candlelight battled the encroaching darkness that seemed to seep through every crevice. Lila stood motionless amidst the towering shelves, the weight of solitude pressing down like the winter night outside. Her fingers cradled the piece of paper she'd discovered, notes scribbled hastily in the margins, fragments of a map, maybe, or a warning cloaked in cryptic symbolism. Her breath was shallow, a fragile rhythm against the echoing silence. The sting of betrayal still burned deep. Words once whispered by Ellie lingered, words twisted and shared behind her back, the sharp edge of ridicule cutting into the fragile fabric of connection she'd believed in. Lila's heart squeezed painfully, but somewhere beneath the ache, a slow-burning ember of defiance stirred. She unrolled the letter again, tracing the faded ink with hesitant certainty. It spoke of a hidden room, a place shrouded in darkness and memory unseen for years but not forgotten. The previous owner's voice, folded between the script's jagged lines, resonated with a haunting urgency that both terrified and beckoned. Her fingers paused over an unfamiliar symbol etched in pencil, a circle entwined with intricate lines that seemed alive, imbued with purpose. As if the book itself pulsed with secret knowledge, a heartbeat buried underneath dust and hesitation. Lila gathered her scattered notes and cautiously paced to the back of the store, where towering shelves formed a labyrinthine maze. There, beneath the faded floral wallpaper cracked and peeling with age, she pressed her palm along the wall, feeling the cold plaster, sensing something hidden beneath. The silence pressed in, thick and expectant, broken only by the erratic flicker of the candle's flame. "Are you sure about this?" The voice came low and sharp from the shadows. Startled, Lila turned to see a familiar face, Ellie. But the softness she remembered was replaced by something colder, calculating. "I am." Lila's voice was quiet but firm. "There's something here. Something we've missed." Ellie stepped forward into the faint light, eyes narrowing. "You're chasing ghosts, Lila. Maybe some things should stay buried." The tension thickened, unspoken accusations flying like knives between them. Lila's resolve hardened, lonely, yes, but stronger than before. "I have to know. For myself, for all of us." Ellie shook her head, a bitter smile touching her lips before she turned away, her footsteps fading into the murmur of the store, a retreat, or maybe a warning. Alone again, Lila's heart thundered in her chest as she pressed her ear against the cold wall. A faint huma whisper, barely audible, wafted through the cracks. Fingertips trembling, she traced the outline of a seam, barely noticeable beneath the wallpaper. There, hidden behind time and neglect, lay the promise of revelation. With a gentle yet determined push, a section of the wall gave way, revealing a narrow passage swallowed by darkness. Breath caught, heart clenched, Lila reached for the candle and stepped inside. The air was stale and thick, mingled with an unshakable sense of waiting. As she moved forward, the walls seemed to pulse subtly, the shadows growing deeper, alive with secrets long held. At the corridor's end, a faded note pinned carefully to a rusted nail caught the candlelight. Unfolding it, Lila read with dawning horror. These were the last words of the missing owner, pleading for release from something unseen, something that had consumed his very soul. A sudden, inexplicable shiver ran down her spine. The store's lights flickered wildly. The candle's flame spasmed violently before the room plunged into utter darkness. In the enveloping black, a whisper brushed her ear, soft, intimate, unmistakably her name. The hidden room awaited. And with it, a truth that would eclipse everything she thought she understood. The moment the lights cut out, the worst came rushing in it, just darkness, but an all-consuming void that swallowed the shop whole. Lila's hands jerked back from the charred remains scattered across the floor. Her notes, her sketches, the precious clues painstakingly gathered, now nothing but ash and ruin. The acrid scent of smoke clawed at her throat as the humming of the faulty wiring faded into a suffocating silence. Her breath hitched, shallow and sharp, the cold biting through every thread of clothing, sinking into skin and bone like a relentless frost. She stood trembling amid the collapsed paper and broken wood, the ghostly shadows cast by the feeble candlelight thinning to almost nothing, leaving her pinned beneath the heavy weight of loss. Outside the frosted windows, a biting wind whispered through skeletal branches, the skeletal limbs scratching lightly against the glass, like desperate fingers seeking entry. The street beyond was empty, pitilessly so, as if the world had folded in on itself, mirroring the hollow cavern twisting within her chest. The fractured mirror hanging crookedly on the wall behind her caught the faint candlelight, offering a fractured reflection, her own face, pale, eyes dull and swollen, lips parted as though gasping for the remnants of a breath. It was a face she barely recognized, a flickering candle reduced to a guttering wick barely clinging to life. Her hand extended slowly, a trembling attempt to touch the mirror, but the chill of glass was unforgiving. The distance, intangible yet impenetrable, mirrored the growing void she felt inside each heartbeat, a fragile drumbeat in a world unraveling. The once welcoming aisles now seemed endless corridors of isolation, row upon row of dusty tomes and empty spaces echoing back her solitude. Her footsteps, faltering and unsteady, crunched on the debris, a jarring sound in the oppressive stillness. She sank onto the floor, knees drawn up against her chest, and pressed her forehead into her arms. The overwhelming pressure of defeat settled around her like a shroud, the warmth and purpose she dared to kindle snuffed out with a cruel finality. The whisper of a name drifted faintly through the white noise of her spiraling thoughts. Lila carried on the edge of a cold breath, perhaps conjured by her own anguish or an unseen presence lurking in the dark corners of the store. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into impossible eternities, every flicker of the candle a fragile heartbeat in a vast, unyielding abyss. Outside, an unseen storm gathered strength, the wind keening in mournful wails that joined the chorus of lost souls woven into the very fabric of the desolate place. The fragile threads of her mind unraveled further. Laughter and warmth became distant memories, replaced by a gnawing, unrelenting cold. She was trapped within the shadows, within herself, the silent, suffocating dread of being utterly unseen, forever lost beneath the surface of ordinary fears. And as the candle's flame guttered, casting one last flicker of uncertain light, Lila's world slipped into darkness, a slow, inescapable descent into the hollow that awaited beyond hope. The darkness lingered long after the blackout, clinging stubbornly like a thick fog in Lila's soul. The cold draft seeped through the cracked window panes, swirling dry leaves in restless patterns across the worn floorboards, their brittle rustling the only sound uttering a cruel reminder of everything lost. Her breath, shallow and uneven, formed fragile ghosts in the icy air. The once familiar bookstore had become an unforgiving void, its aisles indistinguishable shadows, the scent of burnt paper and melted wax a haunting perfume. Lila sat slumped in the corner behind the checkout counter, a fragile island amid jagged shards of her vanished evidence. The edges of charred pages still fell loosely between her trembling fingers, blackened words now indecipherable, her painstaking search for truth reduced to ash. Her eyes, rimmed with dark circles and streaked with tears, stared vacantly at the trembling candlelight struggling against the engulfing gloom, reflecting a soul fractured and unraveling. The silence was suffocating, punctuated only by the muffled taps of her fingernails against splintered wood, a rhythm as hollow as the fading warmth in her chest. Shadows traced the contours of the space with menacing grace, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer, whispering of failure and abandonment. Each flicker of the candle was a desperate gasp, a flicker on the verge of extinction. Her mind became a labyrinth of whispered doubts, spiraling into deeper chasms where hope and clarity dissolved into lingering fear. The memories of laughter, past warmth, and tentative connections retreated like spectral echoes, replaced by the crushing weight of absence. Even the loyal presence of the stray doggins, a fragile source of light, was dulled by the pervasive chill. In the flickering shadows, fragments of a shattered mirror caught her eye on the distant wall. It fragmented her own reflection into haunting shards, twisted and multiplied like the fractured facets of her mind. An image of herself, fragmented and distorted, gazed back, gaunt and aged beyond her years, eyes heavy with despair and resignation. The oppressive atmosphere bore down relentlessly. She pressed her hands over her ears, brushing away the faint echoes of mocking laughter blending with the swirling whispers that seemed not of this world. A low, mournful wind rattled the cracked window panes, as if mourning the decay of both place and spirit. No more, her voice barely a breath, more a surrender than a plea, faltered into the hollow room. Her body sagged further into the cold floor, heart faltering like that flickering flame that she could no longer summon the strength to protect. Time lost meaning. It folded into endless night, a void where even dreams dared not wander. Outside, the wind tossed a tangle of dead leaves against the glass, their brittle dance a somber echo of her own exhaustion and unraveling. Within that engulfing silence, Lila surrendered to the void, her breath fading into a fragile whisper, on the brink of vanishing completely, as the candle's last flicker succumbed to the absorbing darkness. Amidst the charred remains of what was once her carefully compiled evidence, Lila knelt with trembling fingers sifting through the smoldering wreckage. The scent of smoke and ash clung to the air, rancid and suffocating, mixing with the cold bite of winter that clawed through the cracked window panes. Her world seemed reduced to this fragment, blackened papers, twisted metal, and broken wood, a landscape of loss where hope felt like a faint, unreachable whisper. Her back pressed against the damp wall, Lila's breath formed fragile clouds in the icy air. Outside, the softened patter of melting snow shifted to a steady drip, an irregular rhythm that echoed the erratic beating of her heart. The store, her cage and sanctuary, held its breath around her. The quiet was a crushing weight, broken only by the distant creak of old timber and the low sigh of the wind sliding through the cracks. Her eyes, swollen and raw, caught a fleeting gleam beneath the rubble, a corner of aged parchment, half-burned but strangely untouched by the fire's hunger. She pulled it free with care, the edges brittle yet revealing fragments of a map, a clue leading beyond the ruins. The faint ink traced a route, a glimmer of direction that suddenly kindled a fragile spark within her. A whisper of sound stirred beside Hearth's soft padding of paws across scattered debris. The dog, ever present and vigilant, nudged her hand with a cold, wet nose. Lila allowed herself a faint smiley ember of warmth against the cold desolation. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the fragment, eyes darting over the cryptic symbols and lines. Here was possibility wrapped in ruin, a tenuous thread to grasp, pulling her back from the precipice. "This isn't over," she whispered, voice cracking but resolute, the words a solemn vow to the shadows that watched in silent judgment. As the candle's flicker cast fragile light, a distant creak echoed from deep within the store's ancient bones, a siren call to ventures uncharted and truths obscured. The very walls seemed to pulse with anticipation, the air tingling with the promise of revelation or doom. Lila rose, steadied by a newfound resolve, the weight of despair replaced by a delicate flame of purpose. Her reflection caught in the cracked mirror, fragmented yet unbroken, staring back with wary determination. The store exhaled slowly, shadows shifting as if acquiescing to the stirrings of its reluctant seeker. A final glance at the letter, the beacon hidden deep within its ragged folds, offered reassurance. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with danger and doubt, but it was hers to walk. Outside, the winter wind stirred fallen leaves, swirling them in erratic spirals against the window's an eerie dance of decay and rebirth. Lila stepped forward, poised on the cusp of darkness and discovery, heart humming a fragile hymn of courage. The silence folded around her like a shroud. In that stillness, a whisper soft, urgent carried her name. And with it, the faintest flicker of a forgotten flame. The darkness that had enveloped the bookstore receded slowly, as if hesitant to abandon its unwelcome hold on the night. Pale streaks of dawn seeped through the cracked window panes, casting frail threads of muted amber and blue along the battered shelves. Dust motes swirled lazily in the thin light, dancing in the quiet that stretched like a fragile fabric between despair and hope. Lila sat amidst the debris of her confrontation, the wreckage of her resolve, the shattered remnants of the false sanctuary she'd once clung to. Her hands, trembling still, gently caressed the old wooden table where the burnt remains of her evidence lay, scattered charred sketches, crumpled notes, the fragile hope of unlocking the truth. Her breath hitched, nostrils flaring as she drew in a shaky breath of cold air, listening to the faint drip of melting snow outside, the only sound in the vast emptiness. Her gaze drifted toward the fragile, flickering candle on the window sill, its flame soft, tentative, like a heartbeat unsure whether it should beat or fade. The shadows stretched and danced, cast by the weak glow of the dawn, twirling in slow, uncertain curves. It was a silent ballet of surrender and renewal, of darkness giving way to a hint of warmth. A subtle silence filled the space, broken only by the faint creak of the old shop settling into the new day. Yet beneath that calm, a small tremor of awakening stirred inside her, fragile and timid but unmistakably there. The weight of despair still pressed heavily around her, but the faint pulse of determination and resilience flickered, weak but persistent, like the first brave sprout pushing through frozen earth. Her eyes, weary yet alive, landed on the worn, leather-bound book she had dared to open, the very book that contained the secret notes and the warning that had led her here. Her fingers brushed the cracked cover, tenderly tracing the faded letters, silent acknowledgement that even in ruin, there remained a glimmer of meaning. The cold light outside intensified, revealing patches of frost on the window, the world slowly waking up in pale, silent promise. The shadows of the night retreated to the corners, reluctant to surrender completely but slowly yielding to the dawn's gentle coaxing. Lila took a hesitant step forward, her breathing slow and deliberate. The space around her was a battlefield of memories, fear and faith intertwined in quiet, tentative dance. Today, she saw the cracks in her fortress not as fractures that shattered her, but as openings for light to seep in. A faint smile touched her lips, bitter, sweet, steadfast. Her heart fluttered feebly but with a newfound courage. The flickering candle remained alight, trembling but resilient, an emblem of her flickering hope. She knew the darkness was not yet fully gone, and the shadows still whispered in the corners. But somewhere beyond the faint glow mirrored in her eyes, the first fragile dawn of change was stirring. She reached out quietly, her fingertips brushed the edge of the candle's flame, touching both the light and her fears, and vowed silently that she would confront whatever darkness lay ahead. The morning stretched before her, uncertain but promising a slow awakening to the possibility that even amidst shadows, light could be born, fragile and fleeting, yet undeniably real. The flickering shadows of the bookstore seemed to waver in defiance as Lila stood at the threshold of the hidden corridor. Her heart hammered in her chest, a combination of fear and renewed purpose blending into a silent vow that she would confront the darkness not with despair, but with unyielding resolve. The air was thick, almost viscous, as she stepped forward, each footfall echoing in the sudden silence of the room. Her hand trembled as she grasped the rusted latch, pulling it free with a hesitant yet determined strength. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, suffocating passage cloaked in shadow, the air cold and damp, like the breath of a long-dead force waiting to consume her. Inside, the dim glow of her flashlight revealed walls lined with strange symbols, symbols that seemed to pulse and shimmer in motion, as if they were alive and watching her every move. Her breath was visible now, mingling with the dust motes that flared and danced in the beam of her light like the ghosts of her own fears. But she pressed on, pushing through her trembling, stepping deeper into the unknown. The space grew narrower, claustrophobic, yet beneath her terror, A flicker of clarity grew on understanding that her strength was not in denial but in facing what haunted her. A faint inscription carved into the wall caught her eye. The truth lies beyond the mirror. Asterisk asterisk, her fingers brushed the cold stone, and a shiver ran down her spine. She paused, her mind racing, heart pounding fiercely against her ribs. The moment was fragile and tense. Her eyes caught a faint glint on the floor, a shard of broken porcelain, shattered and darkened with age, but somehow radiating a chilling allure. As her hand reached out to pick it up, the dim light flickered again, casting shifting, eerie shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. The sense of foreboding intensified as she stared into the mirror, an ornate, tarnished frame hanging ominously on the wall. Her reflection showed her trembling, eyes wide with raw emotion, fear, yes, but also the faintest glimmer of awakening. "This is it," she whispered softly, her voice trembling yet resolute. "No more hiding. No more silence." Her fingers traced the tarnished edges of the mirror frame, feeling the cold burn of awareness seeping beneath her skin. A sudden gust of wind howled through the narrow space, and the mirror's surface shimmered violently. Shadows stretched and retracted, almost alive, threatening to swallow her whole. But instead of retreating, she stepped closer, her face reflected in the cracked and flickering glass, her features forged in the fire of newfound purpose. In that trembling silence, she reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the mirror's cold surface. Her image wavered, then stilled, and in that fragile calm, a realization blossomed. She was no longer a passive victim of terror but a seeker of truths buried beneath the lies. The shadows receded, the flickering light steadied, and the room felt a whisper of warmth amidst the chilling gloom. Her breath slowed, her pulse steadied, and her eyes, tired but driven, gazed unwaveringly into the reflection of her resolve. A silent star ignited behind her eyes, a luminous promise of strength brighter than any shadow could banish. She had crossed a threshold, and behind it, the truth awaited, shimmering like a hidden dawn ready to break the darkness. The oppressive shadows that had lingered in the bookstore receded as a resolute light erupted from Coral's lantern, a beacon of clarity and courage. Her silhouette, once trembling with doubt, now stood tall, illuminated by the unwavering glow of her newfound purpose. The flickering, spectral manifestations that once clawed at her mind began to dissolve into the shadows, retreating before her indomitable will. Her eyes, once flickering with fear, now sparkled with unshakable conviction. Her breath, ragged and shallow before, steadied into a calm, purposeful rhythm. The battered, ancient symbols etched into the walls no longer shimmered threateningly but faintly glowed with a warm, almost sacred light, proof that she had transcended mere superstition and embraced her inner strength. Lila stepped forward with deliberate grace, her hand reaching out to gently touch the cold, haunted surface of the hidden door. Her fingertips traced the rusted, intricate lock, a symbol of her own fractured fears. She whispered softly, words laced with unbreakable resolve. "No more hiding. No more silence." Her voice was steady, unyielding. "This is where I take my power back." In a slow, determined motion, she turned the key, feeling the resistance give way beneath her strength. The door unhinged with an ancient moan, revealing the secret chamber beyond, a place of forgotten truths, cloaked in darkness but shimmering with the promise of liberation. Inside, the air shimmered with a strange luminescence, as if the room itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Shadows danced in slow hypnotic waves, no longer threatening but inviting, a strange, eternal dance of release and acceptance. Her gaze settled on the mirror, hanging precariously on the far wall. It reflected Harriet, distorted, aged, and scarred, yet alive with a fierce light that could not be extinguished. Her fingers brushed the glass, and a gentle smile formed, tender and victorious. "This is my truth now," she declared softly, voice imbued with unwavering conviction. "I am no longer afraid of the darkness. I am the darkness's conqueror." The shadows receded further, the room glowing brighter as dawn approached outside, spilling in through the cracked, ancient windows, a symbol of her rebirth. The mirror's surface shimmered, revealing not just her reflection but an unbreakable spirit forged in pain but tempered in hope. Her heart pounding with unstoppable purpose, Coral turned away from the mirror, her silhouette merging into the rising light, ready to face whatever final shadows awaited. The door closed behind her with a final creak, a symbol of her departure from the past into the luminous promise of her own destiny. The scene faded into a wide shot, the bookstore standing resilient beneath the awakening sky, a sanctuary reclaimed by its redeemed guardian, poised at the dawn of her true fight. The soft glow of dawn seeped through the thin curtains, casting a gentle, golden hue over the quiet, battered bookstore. Outside, the air was brisk, carrying the faint scent of winter's retreat, as if nature itself was offering a quiet benediction. Inside, the silence was still, but beneath it pulsed a new, delicate rhythm, a slow, tender acknowledgement of transformation. Lila sat on the small wooden floor near the front window, her fingers gently tracing the worn edges of an old, battered book. Her eyes, now clearer despite the lingering shadows, reflected a depth born of hardened perseverance and fragile hope. Gone was the trembling uncertainty of her past. In its place was a peaceful acceptance, a recognition that she had faced the darkness and come through her ordeal scarred but resilient. The faint whisper of the wind through the cracked glass was like a soft, comforting lullaby, whispering of change and renewal. The flickering candle, unsteady in the early morning breeze, cast a tender light, a silent testament to her inner awakening. Shadows flickered and danced across the faded walls, but this time, they seemed to sway in harmony, embracing her evolving strength. She looked around the shop, observing the countless volumes that now seemed to radiate a silent wisdom, each one a silent witness to her journey. The symbols carved into the old wood, once ominous, now shimmered faintly with a warmth that had not been there before, a gentle reminder that what was hidden or feared could be transformed into a source of understanding. Her hand rested gently on her chest, feeling her heartbeat steady in its quiet resolve. The spiraling spirals of her dark doubts had unwound, replaced by a steady flow of acceptance. The past had not disappeared, but she had learned to carry it differently, no longer as a crushing burden, but as part of her, an integral piece of her unfolding story. The silent hours stretched into a calm dawn, each moment a meditation on what was lost and what was gained. Her eyes caught the small mirror on the wall, its surface clouded with age. She paused, contemplating her reflection not as the fragile woman who once cowered behind shadows, but as someone who had emerged from the abyss with a quiet dignity. A gentle smile, soft and genuine, touched her lips. She acknowledged her scars not as marks of weakness, but as the map of her survival. The cool air brushed her hair, tousled it softly, as if nature itself offered a quiet blessing. Outside, the first light spilled over the horizon, illuminating the world in a hush of promise and renewal. Inside, she took a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of her journey lift lightly, but undeniably. The shadows receded further, morphing into a gentle glow that whispers of new beginnings. Lila's gaze settled on the door, slightly ajar, an invitation to step into whatever tomorrow might bring, unafraid and at peace. Her hand reached out, not to hide, but to embrace the soft, silent promise of acceptance and the dawn of an understanding that she was finally free to forge her own path, guided by the quiet strength of her own resilient heart. The setting sun cast a gentle amber glow across the quiet town, softening the edges of winter's harsh grip. Inside her modest home, the faint glow from a small lamp illuminated the contours of her face, marked by lines drawn from years of silent struggles, yet softened by the warmth of acceptance. Lila sat quietly, the final piece of the past laid before her in a fragile, trembling hand, a letter from the owner, a testament to the darkness and light within her journey. She unfolded it slowly, her fingertips trembling as the fading paper surrendered to her gentle touch. The words within, faded yet resilient, spoke of understanding of a darkness that had long hidden the truth, and of forgiveness that had finally found its voice. The shadows haunted me, and they sought to drown us all. But I realize now, the darkness was never the enemy. It was the part of us that refused to look away. The truth was buried beneath layers of fear and silence until someone dared to listen. Her eyes lingered on the words, reading and rereading, each word a brushstroke painting a new understanding. Her breath, gentle and steady, became a quiet prayer of forgiveness for herself, for the shadows, for the ghosts that had haunted her. The room grew quiet, the flickering flame casting a soft, welcoming glow. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, carrying away the remnants of despair and ushering in a new dawn of peace. The mirror on the wall reflected her profile, unburdened and serene, a woman who had faced the abyss and emerged whole. Her hand reached out, not to hide, but to embrace. She ran her fingers along the edge of the mirror, feeling the cool surfacey and unspoken acknowledgement of her inner scars, now transformed into symbols of resilience. The shadows in her mind receded, replaced by a luminous clarity and understanding that the darkness had gifted her, uncovering her deepest truths. Her eyes, once haunted by fear, now shimmered with a gentle, unshakable grace. In that quiet moment, she closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath, accepting everything she had endured, trusting that she was finally free from the grip of her fears. A tender smile played on her lips as she looked into her own reflection, and in the silent stillness, she saw the dawn of a new beginning, the silent promise of healing and renewal. The camera pulled back, framing her in the warm glow of the room, surrounded by the symbols of her journey: faded books, flickering candles, and a mirror reflecting unspoken truths. The scene faded softly into the evening, a timeless testament to the quiet, profound power of acceptance and peace, whispering that within the darkness, finally, there was light. The soft glow of dawn stretched across the quiet town, washing the sky in muted shades of pink and lavender. Inside her home, still bathed in the gentle hush of morning, Lila sat before the old mirror that had witnessed her darkest moments and her profoundest rebirth. Her reflection was a mosaic of lines, stories of pain and resilience intertwined, yet her eyes now shimmered with a calm, unshakable acceptance. The flickering candle had long since burned out, its tiny flame extinguished, leaving only a faint, residual glow that echoed in her chest, a symbol of the fragile peace she had finally found within herself. Time seemed to slow as she reached out with tentative fingers, tracing the glass's surface, feeling the ghost of her past scars merge with the glow of her present strength. Outside, the world was awakening, the distant chime of a bell in the town square a gentle reminder that life persisted beyond shadows. The air was crisp, the scent of earth and winter lingering, a quiet, tranquil promise of continuity. Among the shadows of her memories, she saw not the darkness, but the soft light that had always been waiting to bloom. Her breath came softly, a series of delicate clouds dissipating into the morning, the fragile remnants of her former fears dissolving like mist. She exhaled, releasing of all that haunted her, whispers of her name, the specters of failure, the shadowed corners where secrets once thrived. In that silence, she felt her heart beat with a new rhythm, a slow but unwavering pulse of hope. The scars that once branded her fears now shimmered as badges of courage. Her eyes, softened and serene, gazed into the mirror's depths and saw only peace and acceptance of the marred but resilient soul that had endured. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, causing the light from the window to dance across her face, each flicker a reminder that even in stillness, life moved quietly forward. The stillness grew, not as a void but as a sanctuary, a space where shadows and light could coexist in harmony. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence seep into her bones, feeling the gentle hum of existence that whispered of tomorrow's promise. The world outside remained untouched, yet within her, a tranquil dawn unfurled, an eternal moment where fears faded into the calm acceptance of her own beating heart. As she turned away from the mirror, the image of her old self faded into the background, the quiet acknowledgement that she had finally bridged the gap between shadow and light, the battle between darkness and hope. The once flickering candle now just a memory, replaced by the luminous glow of peace that would linger long after shadows had been banished, cast away by the resilient dawn of her renewed spirit. What secrets hide in your walls? Share your thoughts below.